Someone sent me a video about how the Poles are being intimidated by the EU empire. And this reminded me of the social war, something called the social war. I didn't learn it from history. I didn't do ancient Roman history, but from my general reading, I do remember something called the social war, which was about Italy, the various tribes in Italy losing their identity because they wanted to be Roman citizens, because Rome was the most powerful city on the Italian peninsula. And this process of getting the rest of the Italians to come under the umbrella of the Romans was called the social war. And what's happening in the EU now reminded me of this. There have been other instances of this in European history, such as the Zollverein, when the little German states decided to come under the wing of Greater Germany after the Franco Austrian War in 1870. Really, nothing succeeds like success. So if you've just won a war against France, which was the other great land power of Europe, then that will impress a lot of little German states who think they might be better off being part of you. And that would be when they willingly, without a war, cede their national sovereignty to be part of this idea of a greater Germany, a greater German empire, particularly a Germany that defeated Austria. And that happened in the Franco Austrian War was in the 1860s, I seem to remember. (1866), my apologies, the Austro-Prussian War, that's it, or the 7 Weeks' War, fought between the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Prussia. So basically it's a fratricidal war, but not a very severe one, because it's, people speaking the same language. And just, being in two minds about being ruled by the other. And this was a time of the wars of Europe, of unification in Germany. And I'm saying the social war is something that was similar to this, but based in but going back longer in time. So I will read you now the Wikipedia entry on the social war between 91 to 87 BC. The social war, also called the Italian or Marsic War, was fought between 91 to 87 BC between the Roman Republic and several of its autonomous allies in Italy. The Italian allies wanted Roman citizenship, not only for the status and influence that came with it, but also for the right to vote in Roman elections and laws. They believed that they should be treated equally to the Romans, given that they had formed cultural and linguistic connections with the Roman civilization and had been their loyal allies for over 2 centuries. The Romans strongly opposed their demands and refused to grant them citizenship, thus leaving the Italian groups with fewer rights and privileges. The situation escalated in 91 BC, leading to the outbreak of a devastating war in which the Italian allies, headed by the Samnites and Marsi, led a revolt against Roman rule for 4 years. Most of the Etruscan, Umbrian, and Latin allies did not join the rebellion. In order to end the conflict and to avoid future conflict of the same kind, the Romans decreed several laws by which the peoples and cities who remained loyal or surrendered to Rome would be awarded Roman citizenship. By 87 BC, Roman victory was complete, and citizenship had been extended to all of peninsular Italy. The social war led to a complete Romanization of Italy. The Etruscans and Italic peoples quickly integrated themselves into the Roman world after gaining Roman citizenship. Their own languages and cultures became extinct in the process, and the term Roman came to refer to all inhabitants of Italy. The Romans did not consider Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica part of Italy during this period. Cisalpine Gaul was also not legally considered Italian territory until 42 BC. Cisalpine Gaul is really France. I think. Okay, I'm not going to go there because I'm very vague about that. Anyway, it wasn't. Cisalpine Gaul was not legally considered Italian territory until 42 BC, when it had been merged into Roman Italy, as indicated in Caesar's unpublished Acts. So do I need to tell you a bit more? Or perhaps it's just for my own. I think that's all we need to know, really. I don't want to complicate it with too much detail, but I think we now understand why these tribal combinations come as a result of some ideological momentum, an ideological and political momentum going towards unification rather than disintegration. And obviously, when you have a strong nation that is being successful, then it will attract a lot of satellite kingdoms who want to be part of it. And what happens when you become a member of this group is that you will be ceding your identity to the greater whole. And of course, there's a lot of language laziness, because I guess most people don't enjoy learning different languages. So once they learn one big one that will serve them well enough, they don't really want to learn lots of other different languages unless they have to. So once you lose your language, you lose a lot, because language isn't just a code. It's a way of life. Different people with different ways of thinking, and once you lose your language, you are giving up something greater than the actual speaking of the language. So although the Etruscans were older than the Romans, really, they gave it up. But anyway, it's okay. I guess we don't really miss them. We use their story as a lesson to be learned about where our country is heading when we give up certain things in return for certain other things. And we know stuff is happening in Poland, and they don't like being told what to do by the EU. I suppose the question to be asked is, does the EU have to be run in this way? Can't we let the different European nations with their different languages and history exist in a way that is in harmony with their desire for identity and self-esteem. I think that's what we all need. As individuals and nations, we want to feel that we are somehow special. When we don't want to think that we're just a number, a cog in a great piece of machinery that hardly matters. So for this reason, I think nations and tribes are human groupings that keep us happier than if we were, in a very big group that doesn't even acknowledge our own, our individuality. An example of this can be, well, so see, the obvious example is people living in a hotel room or people living in homes with their spouse and their children or their extended family. I imagine that there are advantages to living with members of your extended family, because there's always somebody in the house to receive your deliveries, your Amazon deliveries, for example, or you. And I suppose the downside of this is that you have to live with annoying people who are your relations and who know all about your business. But perhaps, even with its inconveniences, people tend to prefer to live in a family because these family members can help each other and give each other a sense of belonging and not make life quite so lonely as living alone in a hotel room, for example. And also, being part of the group gives us a sense of identity because our group will reinforce our identity by interacting with us and knowing who we are and treating us as an individual whose ways are known to the group, and that would reinforce our identity, sometimes in a good way, but perhaps sometimes in an oppressive way. But be that as it may, living in such groups would tend to reinforce our sense of identity, and maybe that's what we want. Perhaps the greatest fear of people when they have mental health issues, I suppose, is that they worry that they might no longer be themselves. For example, people have all kinds of concerns, I suppose, about their mental health, and I suppose the worst thing to happen to us is, well, losing our mind. What does it mean to lose our mind? I think the worst is losing our memory. And of course, this is associated with old age, dementia, or no, not being able to do things that we used to be able to do. I mean, I know somebody who suffered a stroke and was no longer able to tie his own shoelaces. So we lose skills when stuff happens to our brain through strokes or mental health issues or whatever accidents. So there's always the danger of losing whatever knowledge we used to have, whatever skill we used to have, and I suppose the worst is no longer knowing who we are. So amnesia would be just not knowing, anyone that used to be our nearest and dearest, not knowing our spouse, our parents, our children, these kinds of really quite alarming things were to happen suddenly to us. So issues of identity are really about knowing who we are. And we know who we are if other people know who we are. So somebody calling our name would reinforce our sense of identity and treating us in a particular way and reminding us of things that we might have done, since from childhood or, whatever. By interacting with us, they reinforce our sense of identity. And although this can be annoying with spouses and parents, they are also essential to our identity. And so were these Etruscans and Samnites and people who pooled their sovereignty with the Roman Republic. We are now told that the social war ended up in these different tribes eventually giving up their language and their own traditions and identity. But that was okay because they gained something greater and became part of the Roman Empire. So, swings and roundabouts. But what does it mean for us living in a global empire? Apparently, a lot of people are unhappy. Things aren't what they used to be, and they remembered a time when their country was this or that, and they didn't have all these foreigners and whatever, and they don't feel as stable and as self-assured as they used to be. But then this is something that might happen to people as they get older. And perhaps getting older as a nation, and this would mean the rising, the increasing of the average age of the nation is something to do with not having enough babies. Because obviously, if the national age rises, it means fewer and fewer people are having children. And if the national age comes down, it means more and more people are having children. And then you would have a different kind of national character. And I suppose the burden of marriage is, in a way, inescapable because by trying to escape the responsibilities of marriage, the West has put itself in this position of being in a senescent society of increasing disability, I'm afraid to say, and rising crime. And sadly, nobody's going to do anything about it, or nobody at the moment is capable of discussing it, either with me or anyone else. How does this sort of thing happen? I think it's because when we no longer stay in family groups, the different generations no longer talk to each other or don't talk to each other in a full and frank way that they might otherwise do in a patriarchy where elders are respected. Because if elders are not respected, then they would fear to tell the next generation, even though they be their children, what they really think of so many things. And by refusing to be respectful, the younger generation may be depriving themselves of the advice of the older generation. And so there will always be a price to be paid for living one way rather than in another way. Of course, my work would be accomplished more easily if people listened to me in a respectful way and actually asked intelligent questions and tried to understand what I was saying before throwing rocks at me. And then things would be accomplished far more quickly, wouldn't it? And I think a loss of identity would be in the way that people address each other. I have in my time been addressed as dude, mate, and other extraordinary titles. It seems strange for a woman to be called mate by a complete stranger who is a young man. And I suppose Americans would call it, Americans use dude in a way that the English might call each other mate, which is something the working classes would do, and they would only do it to other working class men. But these days, in our proletarianized, egalitarian times, and also gender confused times, everyone's mate. Nobody asked me about my preference for gender pronouns, and I suppose I had to accept it or be rather rude to that young man who was giving me directions that I had asked for, but I didn't ask to be called mate. So I think the way in which we address each other leaves something to be desired. Because if we do talk to each other mindful of the age and gender of the other person, we would know our place and know how to behave towards them and not offend them. So egalitarianism is really I'm not going to say byproduct, a consequence of the egalitarianism of the French Revolution, the whole idea of equality, which frankly isn't working because it makes a lot of people feel disgruntled and at sea about how it is they should treat another person, and often they feel disgruntled at the way they're being treated and the way they're being addressed. So perhaps the old-fashioned way is best. Issues of identity will obviously be relevant to our sense of self-esteem, and being able to discuss these things in a rational way would help us resolve our issues with each other. But it doesn't appear that anybody really cares about these things. Perhaps these ideas are too abstract. And that's the other thing. We are the people who are degenerate. So with each passing day, we become more stupid and more immoral and more irrational and more incapable of discussing anything rationally or honestly, because the truth is really so ugly. So a lot of time is wasted by people talking nonsense. A lot of it is just therapy, I suppose. People want to they just want to hear their own voices. I think it's probably because they're afraid that if they don't take selfies of themselves, they'll forget who they are. If they don't hear their own voices, they think they might disappear. I don't really know. It's a kind of neurosis, really. But I think the worst thing is that so many people don't think that they live in a rational or decent society. They think that they live in a society where everybody else is just as mad and silly as they are, and the politicians are corrupt and incompetent, and they live in a declining society, a degenerate society, and a society that is getting from bad to worse, and this will have implications for their identity and self-esteem. So it's sad indeed that we live in a matriarchy. We are a matriarchy, and worse than that, we're not a society who can talk about these things rationally. We are people in a matriarchy, in denial that we live in a matriarchy. And this is obviously evidence of neurosis, of psychosis, of impending disaster. Can this be corrected? I think so, but only if people will do the proper thing. But in a society that doesn't even have a unquestionable chain of command, then everything becomes very difficult. You don't know who to approach, and you don't quite know how to treat them, and they don't quite know how to treat you, and then people will get offended and upset and angry, and this will retard any implementation of the solution, if indeed the solution is even being discussed. I get the impression that a lot of people don't like talking about the solution because they are too afraid to do so. They are afraid of discussing anything that might work in case it upsets anybody. So, and that's because fundamentally all the laws are wrong, and all the people in charge are not the ones who are supposed to be in charge, because they're not the best people. Ultimately, all this is about the law and who enforces it. And if the wrong people are in charge, if the wrong laws are being enforced, then things will get from bad to worse. And this means that we will continue to forget who we are, lose our skills, not be able to do the things that our parents, grandparents, and ancestors were able to do with greater ease. But I hope that there is some idea of trying to solve the problem by a rational conversation. I know most people are half mad anyway. They're neurotic. They're lying to themselves. They've been lying to themselves for their entire lives. They don't want to acknowledge that they've been lying to themselves. The only way back to sanity must be through the rational analysis of the problems. And if people can't even have a dialogue of asking an obvious question because they are too afraid to even ask a question, then I guess the problem won't be solved.